That was all fake news, by the way. I made it all up myself. Well, thanks for being here. This is very heartwarming to have all these folks here in the chairs. There's one chair left, I think, and right over there. But thanks to the library for having me, and to Conserving Carolina for inviting me. And it's a wonderful facility, and I hope you are friends of this library. Come on in.
Thank you.
There's your chair right there. Okay. And there's another one right over here. Okay. So I shook everybody's hand except yours. Hi. Hi. Thanks for coming. And I'm going to talk for about an hour. And then I'm going to have 30 minutes, so I have set aside for questions and answers. So I'm going to ask you to hold questions. Otherwise, I'll get off on some tangent. We won't ever get finished with it. But I brought with me my roommate from Newberry College over here, Doug Dietz, who celebrated his 50th reunion this weekend down at Newberry. And oddly enough, sitting beside him is Jerry Baskin, who also went to Newberry with us. And this is the first time we've ever had 3 Newberry graduates in one room at the same time. So I'm glad they came, but I'm glad all of you are here too. So with that, I think it's not really a test. So if those of you who had test anxiety and sweaty brows, that's just my focusing slide. If I show this to a high school student, they have no idea what it is. But all of you do, of course, because all of you are more than 12 years old. And test pattern from black and white television days, you know. So, and I showed this picture at a presentation once in Boulder, Colorado, and a woman in the back stood up, and she was wearing a sari, and she had a red dot in her forehead. She said, "I know what it is, I know what it is, I know what it is. It's the aerial view of a Taj Mahal." And she said, "No, there's some steps missing down right here, so it can't be, because the Taj Mahal is a perfect building." But I say that because she had a whole different perspective on this than anybody else did. And what I'm going to give you is a different perspective on hummingbirds than anybody else can. Because I'm not going to tell you about how to attract hummingbirds to your backyard and things like that. I'm going to talk about research that I have done. So you're going to hear from the horse's mouth what nobody else has ever done. And so I hope you're excited by that concept. And if we have time at the end, we can talk about how to attract to your backyard too. So without further ado, I hope your phones are off and that you can see the screen and that we jump right into the first slide, which is Operation RubyThroat Hummingbird Project. That's what I'm all about. And the real title, as Pam said in her introduction, is Hummingbirds from Your Yard here in South Carolina to the Neotropics, but more importantly, back again. It's not a one-way street. Okay, and we're going to talk about that a lot tonight. So, Operation RubyThroat, the Hummingbird Project, I established a long time ago, and I'm called the principal investigator. Here's my little avatar right here. You'll see this more often tonight. But I always have to give credit to my coordinator in Central America named Ernesto Carmen. And we'll hear more about him also as we go. So I have this website, www.rubythroat.org. Can I get that arrow out of the way? Yeah, we go. And anybody been to that website? Let me ask that again. How many of you have been to that website? Lie. Come on, come on. All right, there's your first homework assignment. www.rubythroat.org. And if I take off my sweatshirt and turn my back on you, it's not because I'm trying to be rude, but because on the back of my shirt is www.rubythroat.org. And I wear this shirt every Sunday, sit in the front pew, and everybody behind me can see www.rubythroat.org. All right, homework assignment number 1. Anyway, RubyThroat.org is target audience is students, teachers, and citizen scientists of all ages. I call it what is really K through gray. And again, all of you would qualify one way or another on that. So Hilton Pond Center for Piedmont Natural History, the longest name for the smallest nature center in the world. I established a nonprofit organization in 1982 on family property near York, South Carolina, about 80 miles east of here. and devoted to three things, as Pam said: research, conservation, and education. So I have another website, www.hiltonpond.org. Anybody been there? Better hands that time. Better liars we got now. Well, this website is much, much larger even than the RubyThroat site, because the RubyThroat site's about hummingbirds. This is about everything else natural history-wise. And I do something called This Week at Hilton Pond. And This Week at Hilton Pond is a series of nature essays, photo essays. I just posted yesterday the 701st photo essay. That's a lot of writing and a lot of photos. So you do want to check it out. You can get a non-fattening online subscription. You can sign up tonight or just send me an email, and I'll be happy to get you that every week or every couple of weeks at least. So it's a very comprehensive website. So where is Hilton Pond Center for Piedmont Natural History? Well, there's North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and we're in York, which is just over the border from Charlotte, and again about 80 miles east of you here in Landrum. And it's part of the Piedmont, and the Piedmont is a very unstudied part of the world. Everybody that wants to do nature studies either goes to the mountains or the beaches, and they ignore the Piedmont. And the Piedmont's quite large. People don't realize how big it is, but it goes across 10 states, all the way from the very southern tip of New York to central Alabama. And people ask me, well, what's the Piedmont? You guys know what it is because you live in it, right on the edge actually, because you're going to the foothills from here. Well, it's bordered on the west by the Appalachian Mountains, and it's bordered on the east by the coastal plain. And York is right smack in the middle, north to south and east to west, so it's the quintessential Piedmont Nature Center, okay? Everything that goes on there goes on elsewhere in the Piedmont, maybe with different organisms, but the same sort of thing. So what do you have? Rolling hills. You have a lot of tributaries that form those hills, and you have a lot of red clay, because the Piedmont was over-farmed for 150, 200 years, corn, cotton, tobacco, and these days soybeans. And most of the topsoil is now in the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. So this is an aerial view of the Hilton Pond property. Just to be clear, this is what I call not Hilton Pond, because it's not quite on the property, just a little piece of it. Hilton Pond itself is a much smaller body of water up there to the northeast. But you can see it's surrounded by well, this isn't showing up on the screen. You can see hay fields up there to the north and to the east. You can see a little subdivision to the south. And over to the west, a 65-acre stand of loblolly pines that were cut in 1994. And there was an instantaneous change in bird life on my property. It was just stunning to see what happened. The duck's eye view of Hilton Pond is like this. And everything in that photograph you can see is what a bird would like. Trees that provide nesting or fruit, things like oaks and dogwoods and cedars. Along the edge, a lot of shrubbery providing shelter and nesting sites again. But the most critical thing in the photograph, there's our old farmhouse back there in the white back there. Most critical thing in the pond is the pond itself, because water, believe it or not, is a more scarce resource in nature than food is. So if you want to attract wildlife, including birds, to your yard, you put out water, and it'll bring them in. And don't put your bird bath 20 feet off the ground, put it down at ground level. Put up a mister for hummingbirds if you like. Water is really crucial, okay? And keep it clean. Okay, so this is the legal view of Hilton Pond. The pond itself in the center, the red area to the right is the old farmhouse and the banding shack where I do most of my work. The letters around the buildings themselves are where I do most of my hummingbird trapping and banding. But I also have about 2.5 miles of nature trails, and that's what all the other letters are. They're places where I also catch birds, and you'll understand that in just a minute. But it is quite small. I said it's the smallest nature center in the world with a long name. It's only 11 acres. And it's still the most active bird banding station in the Carolinas, year-round bird banding. In fact, since 1982, 127 species of birds banded on the property, 171 seen altogether, which is pretty incredible. And of those 127 species, exactly as of, the latest one I've had was the red-headed woodpecker, But as of yesterday morning, 69,476 birds banded.
Oh, wow.
69,476 birds banded. Some places they throw babies in the air when I say that. It's just amazing. Okay. That's a lot of birds. A lot of bird droppings on my pants. And of those 69,476, exactly 6,355 ruby-throated hummingbirds. So. Now, that's a lot of hummingbird. What was that noise? Oh, come on. That's the sound of babies. You want to make the sound of learning, which is, ah. Don't get involved emotionally with these hummingbirds, okay, whatever you do. That's a lot of hummingbirds, but it's only about a shoebox full. You know, they're pretty small things. So anyway, this is a pretty neat photograph, and it does turn you on if you're a hummingbird enthusiast. But I like this photograph for a lot of reasons. It's an adult male ruby-throated hummingbird. Only the adult males have a red throat. But you can see my thumb. I have the most photographed thumb in the history of ornithology because I'm always holding birds like that. But my thumb's important because it gives you some sense of scale. The hummingbird's head is only the size of my thumbnail. Okay? And the hummingbird's body is only the size of my thumb. So people want to know how big is a hummingbird, you just hold your thumb up. Little kids have to hold two thumbs up, but that's the size of a hummingbird. People say, well, what's the wingspan? Well, that's the same. Like this. So this is the secret sign of Operation RubyThroat right here. Okay. Right here. So if you're walking down the streets of Landrum one night and somebody comes up and tries to mug you, just do this, and you'll be saved. You'll be saved by Operation RubyThroat. But that's phenomenal. A bird the size of your thumb, wings span the same size, flying to Central America and coming back to your own backyard. It cannot happen, but they don't read the manual. They do it anyway. So people say, how do you catch hummingbird? It's easy. Leave your garage door open. How many? How many? Yeah, look at that. There's a solution to that. Close your garage door. And that rope handle that hangs down inside that has red on the end of it, cover it up with tin foil, spray paint it black or something. It's easy to catch them, but it's not legal to catch them unless you have a permit, okay? So I catch them using something called mist nets because they kind of blend into the mist, you put them up. The bird can't see it when it's against vegetation, and it flies along and gets caught in the net. Now this seems like it might be traumatic, but I get the same birds caught in the same trap and the same nets over and over and over again. I don't think it traumatizes them at all. The mist nets also catch other things, including sometimes they're non-selective. You can't tell what's going to fly into them. And sometimes you even catch graduate assistant helpers whose nose ring was supposed to have been taken out before she went to the field. But I left her in the net and later banded her and released her, but put her back on an airplane. I also use something called Dawkins Traps, named for Ross Dawkins, who invented it. This is a passive trap, and it's simply an open door in a cylinder of mesh with a hummingbird feeder hanging in it. The bird flies into the door and does what it does in your garage. It flies up to the top and can't figure out how to get back out again. And I just stick my hand in through the door, reach up and get it. Okay? Pretty simple. Again, mostly selective, but I catch things like warblers and Carolina wrens and sometimes tanagers in that trap also. And then there's another type of trap, which would be band or activator traps. Sliding door on the right, I might have a fishing line hook up to that. I can pull the string and the door would go shut. This one happens to be electronic. There's a receiver up on the top, battery powered. I have a transmitter. The bird flies in. I push the button and the door goes shut. Okay? So that's pretty selective, but I have to watch it all the time in order to make it work. So it can be very, very time consumptive. So banding hummingbirds is a lot harder than catching them. Okay, so banding, the whole banding process is sort of interesting. If you're a duck hunter, for example, you probably know what bird bands look like. Most people don't, but they're simply aluminum rings. They come in various sizes. That smallest one there is for a chickadee, the biggest one's for a bald eagle. And they're issued to me by the Bird Banding Laboratory in Laurel, Maryland. And they oversee, as a federal unit, everything that we do as banders. Most of the bands have on them a unique number, 4 digits followed by 5 digits. The old style bands had a little note on the top that says call 1-800-327-BAND, but now if you find a bird with a band on it, you simply go on the web and report band, and you'll get instantaneous feedback on who banded that bird and when. And that's what the banding process is all about. If you report a banded bird because it hit your picture window, maybe Fluffy brought it in. Don't get me started on feral cats, because that's a whole different soapbox. But a large number of birds are reported to the banding lab because cats killed them and bring them up to your doorstep and very proudly show them off to you. And that's unfortunate. I once banded a white-throated sparrow in York, South Carolina, and 15 days later, it was killed by a cat in Newfoundland.
Oh my goodness.
1,800 miles away. Good piece of data, not much good for the bird, okay? So if you report a banded bird, then you get a certificate of appreciation suitable for framing to go over your kitchen table, and I get a printout saying you found that bird in Landrum and when, and that's how we exchange data and learn about migration, we learn about longevity, we learn about site fidelity, and we learn about general population dynamics through banding. And it's a permanent way to mark a bird, and it's the only permanent way, because you can't put something on their feathers, they molt them off. So that's the way to do it. Okay, so hummingbird bands are a whole different ballpark. And hummingbird bands are so small they come engraved on a sheet of aluminum. It's so thin. You cut out a strip of bands with a pair of scissors, and then you have a single band like that, and then you have to form the band into a ring and get it on the bird's leg. And to do that, you have to sort of immobilize the bird. Here's another of my very famous inventions called the tube, and it's just like an MRI. You slide the bird in the tube, it can't struggle, can't hurt itself, and I can get the band on the bird's leg. Okay, again, my thumb for sense of scale here, so pretty small. That's like a cigar right there, you know, pretty small. And all the birds I do at Hilton Pond get marked with green dye on the throat. It's just a magic marker that I put across. And the reason I started doing that is because, remember I told you go in the same trap over and over and over again? And I was pulling the string over and over and over again, and getting the same bird out and reading the same number over and over and over again. A lot of wear and tear on the bird, a lot of frustration on my part. I can see the green on the bird when it goes in. I can't see the band, and so I don't pull the string. So I'm the only person that's allowed to do that, put green on. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's an important factoid. So there are only about 3,000 active licensed bird banders in the United States and Canada. And of us, only about 250 of us are allowed to do hummingbirds. And again, it's not hard to catch them, but it is hard to manufacture the band and put it on appropriately. Most of those people are working out west, because southeastern Arizona, you got 15 species of hummingbirds. Okay, in the east, we've got the RubyThroat. And we'll be talking about that as we go. So here is the object of our affection right here. This is a ruby-throated hummingbird, an adult male. And he looks like he's been kind of beaten up. This was a late August photograph, so he's been through the hummingbird wars. You know what that means. You've seen it at your feeder. In Costa Rica, they call it Colibri garganta ruby, the hummingbird with the red throat. And scientists call it Archilochus colubris. Colubris, again, from the Spanish colibri, meaning hummingbird, and Archilochus from 2 Greek words that mean to ambush, which I think is a perfect scientific epithet for the ruby-throated hummingbird. So those of you who have feeders know exactly what I'm talking about there, so, to ambush. Okay, so ruby-throats really have an enormous distribution. Enormous. It's the biggest distribution of any of the 338 species of hummingbirds. They go all the way from, in summer, from Canada, across the eastern 38 U.S. states. They've now been found breeding in British Columbia. And I think they're going to make their way down through Washington State and Oregon and take over California. And then they'll be the quintessential hummingbird, and they'll rule the world. So, I'm sorry, I was getting carried away there. In the wintertime, they all bail out and go to Mexico or 7 countries of Central America, only as far as Western Panama. They don't go to South America, okay? Don't ever say that. They only get as far as Panama. Most of them are in central Mexico and further south. And then historically, some of them have overwintered year-round in southern Florida, the Gulf Coast of Texas. And with increasing regularity over the last perhaps 40 years or so, they've been showing up further, more and more on the coast, and then even more recently inland away from the coast, okay, in the wintertime. Okay, so in fact, about 5 years ago, I went out to the Outer Banks and I banded about 15 ruby-throated hummingbirds way out there. Okay, and that was unprecedented in the wintertime at Christmas. What's going on there? Wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if hummingbirds were the messengers? You know, I mean, some folks won't listen to polar bears and they won't listen to icebergs. Maybe they'll listen to hummingbirds. Huh? Maybe they will, because hummingbirds are cold. Ruby-throats are cold weather wimps, and they can't make it if it's too cold. But obviously, it must be getting warmer. Okay, so ruby-throats are the only hummers that breed in the eastern United States, okay, including South Carolina. But there's no breeding in Central America or Mexico. It's only up here in the north. And here's a female sitting on a lichened camouflage nest, and she actually nested in that same tree 2 years in a row after leaving and coming back. So this is an adult female. She's got a white throat. But you have to be really careful because young males look like females. Yes. They too have white throats. Remember I've been saying adult male ruby throat, red throat? Adult male ruby throat, red throat? Okay, young males look like females. Some of the young males will have streaking on their throat, and occasionally they'll start getting 1 or 2 or 3 or more red feathers on their throat. Then they go off to Central America. They'll get a full red throat. They'll come back the next year and they'll look like an adult male, and they are. And they get down to business. Okay, and you know what business I'm talking about. Okay, all right. So I will say, however, there are other vagrant hummingbirds that do show up in the eastern United States. They usually show up in late fall, when you still have ruby throats. And so you're looking at your feeder and you say, oh, well, those are just more ruby throats. They might not be ruby throats. You could have, for example, Rufus hummingbirds. This is the most common of the vagrants. These are birds that nest as far north as southern Canada, southern Alaska and western Canada, and they sometimes wander eastward in the wintertime. So do black-chinned hummingbirds, which nest in Arizona and show up in the east. And even Anna's hummingbird that comes from Doug's California range out there, they sometimes show up. I had one of these show up in Maine this past couple years. This is a western hummingbird. A hummingbird doesn't even migrate, and all of a sudden it shows up in Maine. What's going on there? Well, curiously, on 23 December 2003, a while ago now, I was in Landrum, South Carolina. And I went to the home of Nan Keenan Van Lan. Anybody know her by any chance? That's her. And I banded a young, hatchier female ruby-throated Rufus hummingbird, again on the 23rd of December, right at Christmas time, about 2 miles from here. So the moral of the story is, people say, when do you take down your feeder? And my answer is, you don't. Okay? As long as you can keep it clean and unfrozen, you can leave it up all winter. And you better call me if you get a winter hummingbird, because I'm going to scoot over this way and we'll get a band on that bird and see what happens to it. I had one Rufus hummingbird that showed up 4 winters in a row the year after I banded her in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Was she lost? No, she knew exactly where she was going, even though she would normally breed in southern Alaska, western Canada. So look out for those winter hummingbirds. All right, we want to talk about ruby throats primarily because they're, quote, our hummingbirds. They're the ones that breed here. So people ask about timing and abundance. When should I put my feeder up? And the answer to that question is, well, you shouldn't take it down. So, well, now, you see that red part there, that's the Hilton Pond dot right there. So you're 80 miles west of here, almost due west. And April 1 is the line that goes through Hilton Pond. So you say, well, I don't put my feeder up till June when I see my first hummingbird. Well, that's because you didn't have your feeder up on time, okay? All right, so you got to get your feeders up first. For this latitude, I'd say St. Patrick's Day is the latest you should have a hummingbird feeder up. Just one, and only fill it part way. There's not 50 hummingbirds out there. St. Patrick's Day, okay? April Fool's Day is probably too late if you want to get the first hummingbirds in the neighborhood in this highly competitive sport of hummingbird feeding. All right. And then they don't even get up to Canada until way up into the first week of May or so. Okay. So when should you take them down? Well, again, if you want to get a winter hummingbird, don't take it down. Okay. We'll talk more about that in a second. Right now, in fact. Okay, so this is my up-to-date chart for this year through the 15th of October, which is today. And this shows you when I banned hummingbirds at Hilton Pond. First one I've ever had was on the 26th of March on 4 different years. Okay, so that's after St. Patrick's Day, but pretty close, all right? So this first wave of hummingbirds come back in early April, then there's a little lull, then there's a second wave that comes around the 15th of May, and then there's another lull, and then starting about July the 15th, things explode. Okay, you know what's going on there is the young are leaving the nest, and you got a lot of birds. And that continues to climb until I reach my peak around the 15th of September, and then on the 18th of October, that's the last day I've ever had one. So if you take your feeder down at Halloween, you're probably safe. Okay, so we're talking about St. Patrick's Day to Halloween is your window for Landrum. Now, why is September 15th so important? Well, first of all, it's Costa Rican Independence Day, okay, which I didn't know till I started going to Costa Rica. But even more importantly, it's my birthday. So next year on September 15th, I expect to get emails from every single one of you saying, happy Independence Day, Costa Rica, and happy birthday, Bill. So, all right, so, but look how quickly things drop off after 15th September. I mean, the bottom comes out. And if you get a bird after the 18th of October, it more than likely is not a RubyThroat. All right, so keep your eyes open. All right, so what has it been like for the last 36 years at Hilton Pond? Well, I started out slow in '84, okay, and only been at half the year. And you can see the red line here is the trend line. Things are going up, okay? You can ignore the white lines because I wasn't around much that time. But look what happened in 2016. I went from 246 birds the year before up to 373 birds. It just blew my mind. And the next year dropped to 298. But this year, I've got 162. It's one of my worst years in the last decade or so. And you're saying, well, why is that? And the answer is, I don't know. Because every year is different. And so maybe you had a lot of hummingbirds this year, maybe you didn't. I did not. And how many birds do you have in your feeder anyway? Well, it's hard to say, but I know because I'm catching them and banding them, and I don't miss many of them. But so I can't explain what happened right there in 2019, but I was disappointed to get only 162 birds. That's half of what I had in 2016. Just amazing. Okay, less than half. So more important than these numbers about how many I catch is how many come back. And about 11% of the RubyThroats I banned at Hilton Pond come back in at least one later year, which is pretty phenomenal. You're saying, well, 11% is not very many. But when I tell you that of the hummingbirds that hatched out this year, somewhere between 60, 70, 80% of them will die before next year. Emotional involvement, you can't do it. It's nature, it's the way it is. 11% is a big number if 80% are dying. And it's a good thing they're dying because otherwise they'd be up here in hummingbirds. All right? Same is true of cardinals, robins, bluebirds. They all die at about a 60, 70, 80% rate. And it's fortunate because otherwise there'd be way too much competition. What kills them? Well, migration is pretty tough when you're the size of a thumb. Plus they fly into the windows, Fluffy brings them in. Diseases, parasites, predators, all kinds of things happen. And the young birds are probably kind of doofless. They can't figure out what to do all the time and just die off perhaps of unknown reasons. So 11% return is really quite good. And I'm quite proud of that number. And what those returns show is site fidelity on the breeding grounds. Okay, they're coming right back. And they come right back and get caught in the same trap year after year. Are they dumb? No, they know where the food is, and they don't associate being handled with any kind of thing stressful. So that's why I think it doesn't bother hummingbirds to get caught at all. That might not be true of all species of birds, but I think it's true of hummingbirds. So how long do they live? Well, I had a female ruby-throated hummingbird that I recaptured, 2016. I had also caught her in 2015, 2014, 2013, 2012, 2011, 2010, and I had banded her in 2009. So she's an 8-year-old hummingbird. And I looked for that year after that most recent one, and I didn't see her again. Disappointed, because if I had seen her, she would have set a new record for longevity in ruby-throated hummingbirds, which is 9 years. Okay, that's not possible. Size of your thumb, Central America, back again. Can't happen, but it does. Okay, so the returns are pretty interesting. They too are on the upswing. And in 2017, which was the year after that really big year, I had a lot more returns. I set a record 62. But this year, 3 years after that, I still got 56. So even though I didn't get many new birds this year, I had my third best year for returns. So that meant a lot of adults, but a low capture rate means not very many young birds. So that's what disturbs me. But we had a really, really wet spring and a really, really hot summer. And so it may be that we lost a lot of birds either in the wet or in the heat, because young birds probably don't tolerate as well as adult birds do. But who knows? Could have been something else. Got to wait and see what happens next year. You know? So this is your backyard in June, July, August. Birds coming to your feeder. By the way, that's a red glass feeder, not red sugar water, okay? Just to make that clear. And if you look out your window in March or February, you see this instead. Okay, and be very curious about hummingbirds. You are one of my students and you have good questions in your mind. So your first question is, do hummingbirds really migrate, Dr. Hilton? That's a great question. In fact, I tell you it's a great question. And I say, apparently they do. That's the way scientists talk, you know. They don't, I think so, yeah, maybe, perhaps. Apparently they do. And then your next question then that comes up in your curious minds is, where do the hummingbirds go, Dr. Hilton? And my answer to that is, I don't know. But being an educator, I say, I think I know how to find out. Okay? And then I challenge you to help me find out where the hummingbirds go. And that actually is what Operation RubyThroat all became part of. Where do they go? What do they do? How do they do it? When are they there? And so here's the historical migrational path of ruby-throated hummingbirds. They all went from the eastern U.S. and they all went across the Gulf of Mexico to the Yucatan Peninsula. Well, all of them. But when I did my graduate work in Minnesota, it didn't make any sense to me that the hummingbirds from Alberta would fly all the way across the Great Plains to go to South Florida. It didn't make any sense to me at all. But how are you going to find out? You can't put a transmitter on them. They're too small. I dream about that every night, but they're too small. Okay? So how do you do it? Well, you put bands on their legs and then you try to find them on the other end. So let me give you one case history. Now, it's case history number 1. And it involves 2 states, South Carolina and Georgia. And in particular, it involves Loganville, a little suburb of Atlanta. And the date is 6 October 1991. What time of year would this be? Fall migration, right? Early October. Okay. And what happened was this woman in Loganville who had actually been to the Neotropics and studied a lot of hummingbirds and was known as the Hummingbird Lady of Loganville, looked out of her kitchen window on the 6th of October and she saw several hummingbirds out there, and one of those hummingbirds didn't look like all the rest of them. And she said, I don't know what's going on. She got her binoculars out and looked at it again. It didn't look right. So this bird just doesn't look right. It's got a green throat. And all my other hummingbirds are ruby throats. They've either got white throats or red throats, and she's got a green throat. And so she goes to the library. Library. They still exist. Isn't that wonderful? She went to, this was before Google, 1991. She went to the library and she got out these tropical hummingbird books, and she's looking for green-throated hummingbirds in North America, and she can't find any. So she calls up a guy named Bob Sargent, who was another hummingbird banner, fairly famous, just passed away a few years ago, and says, Bob, I'm looking at a green-throated hummingbird outside my window in Loganville. And Bob says, there are no green-throated hummingbirds in North America. Says, Bob, I'm looking out the window through my binoculars and my spotting scope, and there's a green-throated hummingbird at my feeder. Bob says, there are no green-throated hummingbirds in North America. And she stamps her foot over the telephone and says, Bob, I've got a green-throated hummingbird at my feeder. And he was so convinced by her argument that he got in his car in South Alabama with his portable hummingbird trap and 75 pounds of tropical hummingbird field guides and drove 9 hours to Atlanta, got out of his car, picked up his binoculars and said, damn, that's a green-throated hummingbird. And he says, but it's color marked. It's color marked. And he said, who's color marking hummingbird? He had to call the bird banding lab. And they said, well, they're being color marked over there in York, South Carolina by Bill Hilton Jr. But he brought his portable hummingbird trap, he set up his trap, he did exactly the right thing, and he caught the bird. And he calls me up and he says, Bill, I've caught 54512 with green on the throat. Is it yours? And I said, sure, it's mine. And he said, why haven't you reported it to the bird banding lab? And I said, well, Bob, there's a lot of reasons, one of which I just banded it 10 days ago in York, South Carolina, and you only have to turn in your banding records every quarter. So he'd gotten it 10 days later. And here it was. I looked at my records. It was a young male that was hatched out that year in 1991. And here it was 170 miles west of York in Atlanta. Wow. Now, I don't know if it did that all in one flight or if it did, 10 miles a day, 17 miles a day or whatever. But it became the very first RubyThroat recaptured and released more than 10 miles away from its banding site. That's 1991. That's not so long ago, okay? It was the very first one. There was a lot of hooping and hollering about that. Why was it in Atlanta? Because Atlanta's a hub. You have to fly there before you go anywhere else. So this bird was on Delta, obviously. Got to Atlanta, changed planes, went on from there to someplace else. But the big question is, was this bird going to Florida where people always thought the birds went? No, because Florida's way down there. And to make my story a little shorter, this bird's going in a southwesterly direction. And in fact, there now have been 4 of my RubyThroats color marked at Hilton Pond. The one I just described from Atlanta, another one from Thomaston, Louisiana, one from Mobile, Alabama, and one from Cameron, Louisiana. Thomaston, Alabama, sorry. So those 4 birds, I don't think we're going to Florida in migration. I just don't believe it. Okay? But before those 4 birds, nobody had any idea what the real route was. I told you, straight from the horse's mouth, right here. Mm-hmm. Unique birds. And they were all color marked, and every one of them was reported by a citizen scientist, just like you. There's your second homework assignment. You don't have to worry about it this year because they're gone. But next spring, on the 17th of March, when you put up your feeder, you sit at your kitchen table and you do not move. You do not move. No, wait, that won't work. Because that'll be spring migration and you're west of me. And the birds probably aren't going to be coming through Hilton Pond over here. You have a reprieve. You don't have to do it until the 15th of August. 15th of August, you start looking next fall during migration for birds that might be going westerly from Hilton Pond. That's your assignment. 3 months, you can't move. All right. Forget your job. Anything else? All right. So question number 2, reprise. Where do the hummingbirds go, Dr. Hilton? And the answer is, I do know. At least for 4 of them. So. But in science, you only need one example to offset a hypothesis. And the hypothesis was like this. where did the hummingbirds go when yours are found in the southeast, Dr. Hilton? And remember, people thought this was the original situation. And that's not what my birds are doing. My birds are doing this. They're lollygagging across the southeastern United States. And maybe they're going from New Orleans or Baton Rouge and going across the Gulf of Mexico. Or maybe they're going to Rockport, Texas. We know there's a lot of staging down there. Maybe they're going across from there. Or maybe they're going overland through Mexico. Maybe, maybe, maybe. All question marks. And the reason is, where do hummingbirds go and fall from the Ghost Coast, Dr. Hilton? And the answer is, it's a very tough question. And the reason it's a very tough question is because of 400,000 plus RubyThroats banded in history in the last 100 years or so. Not a single one has been found on the wintering grounds in the Neotropics. Not a single one. Okay? Well, most of them don't make it. And those that die in a forest in Central America, not much chance of recovering one of those, you know? I mean, army ants will drag them away. They're not very big. So, it gives me an idea for a research project. Question 4B, by the way, would be, where do the hummingbirds go when they leave the Neotropics and come back north? Well, the answer to that question is, both 4A and 4B, I don't know. I don't know. But that gives me another idea for a research project. All right? So we don't know where they're going north, going south, or when they're going north. And since they don't, then why not go where they go? Why not start neotropical field trips, get on an airplane, fly the same route they're flying at just above the wave top, and you're at 35,000 feet, not flapping your wings, but using big engines, and go to Central America. And so that's what I decided to do. Why Central America in midwinter? What do you think I am, some kind of dope? Well, it's tropical down there, for crying out loud. Why not go do your research down there? But more importantly, in midwinter, that's where the ruby-throated hummingbirds are. They're not here. Okay? At least not currently. That's where they are. So we follow them south. And prior to December 2004, there were very few bandings of ruby-throats in the U.S. and Canada. They were all accidental, incidental. 29 banded in Mexico. 14 banded in Costa Rica, 1 in Honduras, 2 in Belize. That's a grand total of 46. Remember that number. It's an important number. Okay, 46 total. That's not very many hummingbirds. It's hard to derive data from 46 birds. So I teamed up with Holbrook Travel Company, who actually got me started on the whole thing anyway. And we started going to Central America. Start out with Costa Rica. Most people that go to Costa Rica end up flying into San Jose, which is the capital, and they end up going over the cloud forest on the Caribbean side or going to the beach or whatever. Well, we flew into Liberia, which is up here in Guanacaste province, up in the northwestern corner, okay, bordering Nicaragua and the Pacific Ocean. And I led this first group of scientists in 2004. I called them very creatively the pioneers. Okay, and we spent 8 days in northern Guanacaste province, near the volcanoes there. And we went there because of Ernesto Carmen, who I mentioned to you earlier. I knew Ernesto when he was a peach-faced little kid. Now he has mustache and actually a beard. So, and he was he still is one of the foremost naturalists in Central America. And Holbrook hooked me up with him, which was very fortuitous because Ernesto figured out that in Guanacaste, that the ruby-throated hummingbirds were hanging around an aloe vera plantation. Okay, now I think you know aloe vera. You might have one growing on your refrigerator, on top of your refrigerator. It's called the burn plant. It's an African succulent. It's a monocot, and it's grown in Central America as, for suntan oil and everything else. You can drink it. They use it in medicine, whatever. So very commonly grown, but it's not native to Central America. Came over from Africa. So there, in just north of Liberia in Caños Dulces, this little town, at the very top left corner you can see a road, which is the access road, and another road coming in. And all this stuff right here, all this open area right here, that's all aloe vera plantation. All aloe vera, and it goes down here and it goes out of the picture off that way. So it was about 300 acres or so of aloe vera. And they grow it just like row crops, just like we grow corn or cotton, okay? And that's what it looks like when it's been planted. Okay, and what they do is harvest the outside leaves and squish them and get all the juice out of them. Well, we got there in late December, and Ernesto said, this is the mother lode of ruby-throated hummingbirds. I've seen lots of them there. And we got there and the aloe was not blooming. And if you're after a bird that eats nectar and your flowers aren't blooming, you got a problem. Okay? And Ernesto and I were dumbstruck. And we were really dragging. Our tails were in the dust as we're walking back to the bus, where these 14 people who'd come down from North America to band hummingbirds were waiting for us. And we said, that's not blooming, there aren't any hummingbirds out there. Turns out he had been there much later in the winter when the aloe was blooming, but we hadn't put two and two together quite yet. So anyway, we're walking back to the bus and we look up in this tree called a Chayote tree. And the Chayote tree, there were hundreds of Chayote trees. But in this one Chayote tree, right beside a bridge, right beside a stream, we looked up in this Chayote tree, and what did we see but an adult male ruby-throated hummingbird feeding on Chayote blossoms. We said, hello you, we're saved, we got a hummingbird. Okay. But it wasn't out there in the aloe vera, it was feeding on a native plant called Chayote. So what do? Well, I made Ernesto and the bus driver climb up this Chayote tree, and they hung a nest right up here in the top of the tree. And not a nest, a trap. I hung a trap up there on top of the tree, and there's a feeder in it, you can see. And there's a fishing line coming down from that tree to this woman's hand, and she's waiting for a hummingbird to fly into that trap way up in the tree. And I'll be darned, it actually worked. And here's a ruby-throated hummingbird hovering inside that trap after the door is shut. And so we had it on a pulley and we lowered the trap down. And by George, we caught a hummingbird, which was our goal. So the pioneers left and were followed immediately by the second wave. And they came for another 8 days of work. And we made some interesting discoveries, those two groups together. This is a hummingbird wing. There's my thumb for scale again. And these are called the primary feathers. They're the main flight feathers on the front of the wing. Remember, this photo is in late December and early January. Okay? And if you look at this wing, you'll see that these feathers look a little different than the others. Not because of shape, but because they're dark and fresh and new. All right? There also is a fourth feather coming in, a number 4 primary, that's not all the way in yet. It's about half in quill. Okay? And then there's a big hole in the wing right here where number 5 primary is missing. And then if you look at numbers 6 through 10 out here, they're old. A little bit worn, kind of grayish. They don't look dark like 1 through 3. And so it turns out that hummingbirds molt their wing feathers from the inside out to the front edge. Okay? You're saying, so what? Well, from a scientific point of view, we had evidence. Here's an adult male hovering at the Chayote. You can see the number 7 primary is missing, and you know, fortunately it's missing both on the same side, so he didn't fly in circles as a result. But this is the first time anybody had ever described this molt sequence on the wintering grounds. They don't do this in North America, because you don't want to start molting your feathers to try to fly across the Gulf of Mexico. You know, you're in trouble. So they do it on the wintering grounds. But nobody had ever looked at it before. So we got to be the first people to describe this. Pretty exciting. Pretty exciting. So we banded 15 total ruby-throats. You might think that's not very many, but that's the first time anybody had ever tried to systematically study ruby-throats on the wintering grounds. So we were pretty excited about that. And incidentally, of those 15, we caught 2 adult males, red throats, after Christmas. Okay? All right, so in 2006, the 06ers went back for 8 days, and we did not go in December or January. We went in late February, and you know why. We're trying to see if the aloe vera was blooming. Okay, and so we got there, and sure enough, the aloe vera was blooming, and incidentally, so were ruby-throated hummingbirds coming in. Now, that's a young male ruby-throat with a little bit of red on its throat. Okay, so we were pretty excited about that. We immediately put up our mist nets in the middle of the aloe vera field, and here's the first thing we found. This is late February. Okay, right wing primaries again. You can't see number 1 because of my thumb, but 2 through 8 are new. Okay, number 10 is halfway in quill, and number 9 is very old and very worn. Okay. You're saying, but Bill, you said they molt from the inside out. This bird molded to number 8, skip number 9, bring in number 10, and then we have to bring in number 9 last. Does that make any sense? It does if you're a hummingbird. Because number 9 is the longest, broadest feather on the wing. And if you're getting ready to fly 1,500 miles back north, which feather do you want to have freshest coming across the Gulf of Mexico? Well, you're probably your longest, broadest feather. So they've got it figured out. Oh, and now we do too, because we started studying ruby-throats in Central America. Now again, that's very esoteric, but it's very important to a hummingbird, because they're not going to survive unless they follow this procedure, apparently. It's what works for them. If it works for them, it works for me. So we now have a more complete description of wing molt. Okay, first person to describe that particular thing. So we banded 51 ruby-throats, more than 15 the year last time. But of those 51, no adult males. Not a single one. Any ideas?
It already left.
Late February? When do you hang feeders? Who comes back first in the spring? Adult males. Adult males come back first in the spring, so I think we missed them by going in late February. They're already on their way back to you. Okay? So what do you think we did the next year? So in 2007, the Lucky Sevens went, and we flew off to Guanacaste in early February. So we're trying to get there when the aloe's blooming, but before the adult males are gone north. Kind of fine-tuning what's going on there. And that year we caught, well, first of all, we did see this in the field. We saw the aloe vera blooming, and we did see adult males. You can see that full red throat there. So we got there early enough for that. But we didn't catch a lot of birds that year. We caught 30, but that's still good. But of those 30, there were 6 adult males. So we knew we'd gotten there at the right time by then. So all of our future endeavors went in early February to Guanacaste. But interestingly, that year, and I wish this were a video instead of a still photograph, but you can look at that picture and you can intuit what's going on there. That's an adult male up on top of the tallest aloe vera stalk in the field. Now what's he doing? He's being territorial, just like he is at your feeder in your backyard at home, okay? And nobody's ever described territorial defense in the tropics just like we have it here at home during the breeding season. But that's not breeding down there, so why is he being territorial? Well, we don't know. Maybe he wants to make sure he has enough food so he can make the northbound migration. Or maybe hummingbirds are just so hardwired they just have to be territorial, you know, and that's the way they are, okay? I don't know why he's doing that, but those are 2 possible explanations. There may be more. All right, so, but more importantly, on our very last day in 2007, we caught this bird. And Ernesto brought it to me in a little bag we carry them in, and this bird looked like it had been run over by a truck. You know, it's in full throat molt, just getting these feathers are in quill. There's no color mark on it or anything, so it means we hadn't caught it that year. But when I got ready to band the bird, I turned it over and, wait a minute, it's already got a band on its leg. Oh, doesn't have a color mark. It's already banded. We're at the same study site. Is it one of our birds, or is it somebody else's bird? So I looked in my records, and the band number is C51517, and we recaptured it on the 9th of February 2007, and it turns out we had banded it in the very same field almost exactly 1 year previously. Not only in the same field, but he was recaptured in the same net. 1,500 miles back exactly to the same net in the same field. Just incredible stuff. There was a lot of hooping and hollering on the field that day when we caught that bird. Okay, very first time in history anybody had shown sight fidelity on the other end, just like that 8-year-old bird showed sight fidelity on the north end. Okay, amazing stuff. Heretofore unknown. You never know what you're going to find when you finally look. So in late January, early February 2008, we went back to Cañas our low fields, and they were in bloom, and we banded 170 total RubyThroats. So we're kind of getting the hang of things. We're there at the right time, and that surpassed our previous 4-year expedition of 97. But only 10 adults out of the adult males out of the 170 birds. So you're saying, what's going on? 10 adult males? What's going on? Well, maybe the adult males are feeding someplace else. Maybe the adult females are pushier than they are and making them go elsewhere. Or who knows? I can't answer the question. Looks like another PhD job right here. So anybody got any ideas, I'll be happy to listen. But the most spectacular results from 2008 happened after we came back home and left Costa Rica. Because on the 20th of June, a guy walked into a truck bay at an auto dealership in Baxley, Georgia, just west of Savannah. And he saw this wad of spider web on the floor of the truck bay. Big high ceiling, a lot of spider webs up there. And he kicks the spider web and it squeaks. And he says, spider webs don't squeak. And he picks it up, and inside of the spider web, he realizes there's a hummingbird. Got into the rafters, couldn't fly back down, got all enmeshed. But he did very carefully pick away all the spider web. Okay. Unfortunately, the bird died in the process, probably because it had been in the truck bay all weekend or whatever. But he was sharp enough to look at the leg of the bird, and he found on it a band. Okay, and he took the band off and he mailed it to me. And it turns out that it's band C1599. If you remember that last band, it was C51 something or other, 515 something or other. And I looked this up to see if it might be mine. And C51599, which was found on the 20th of June 2008 in Baxley, Georgia, actually had been banded by me and my team 6 months previous in the aloe vera fields of Costa Rica. And here it was 1,500 miles further north. It might have been trying to get to Hilton Pond a little bit further, but probably not. It was adult female, so she's probably on her breeding grounds. But you can guess what kind of jubilation come out of this, all right? Because this then was the first migratory hummingbird of any species that was banded on its breeding ground and showed up again back north. Banned on its wintering ground, showed up back north on its breeding grounds, okay? Very first time. And as such, I like this as such. As such, number C51599 is the very first and still only proof that hummingbirds migrate. It's the only proof. Yeah, you can applaud if you want to, it's okay. But the applause is not for me, it's for the hummingbird, okay? All right, nobody else has ever caught one flying back north, just like nobody ever caught one flying south. So, but you only need one piece of evidence here. They don't hibernate in the mud, okay? They fly all the way to Central America and then they come back again. Okay, so, but we're still waiting on more of these birds. Pretty amazing stuff. All right. So I went back to Guanacaste and Cañas in 2009. Went back to the big aloe vera fields. We banded 243 and 147 hummingbirds. It's a lot of birds. And then we, this is what that whole place looked like in those early years. And then we went back, well, that's what you can see the yellow blooming there, the yellow flowers. We went back in 2011, and that's what the field looked like. And we're saying, what the heck? This is all grassland. This is not aloe vera. And it turns out that over the winter, a construction magnate from Boston had bought this aloe vera farm, plowed under the aloe vera, planted grass, put up barbed wire fence, and turned it into a cattle farm. And that's what it looks like now. That's pretty much a crushing blow, you know, because it meant we lost that study site. So we didn't have any choice. That group was called the 11s. We had to go to a restricted site just south of Liberia called Natural Aloe. It was a big plantation that we had banded on the perimeter of where that 2009 dot is, because they wouldn't let us in. They had barbed wire around this aloe vera plantation and armed guards. So we banded on the perimeter, and we actually got some birds out there. And that's where we spent all of our time in 2009, 2010. Or some of our time in 2009, 2010. We finally got inside. They finally gave us permission to go in. So the savvy 712s got in there, and we spent all of our time netting at Natural Aloe. And we did the perimeter, we did inside, and we had pretty good luck down there. In February 2013, however, I got ready to go and I got pneumonia. Okay, and I had my team together, so we had to cancel that trip. But it's probably just as well. Because what I found out just before I would have arrived is Ernesto talked to the Natural Aloe people, and instead of the guys going out there and walking amongst the aloe vera flowers and pulling the outside leaves off, they had a new philosophy of aloe management, which consisted of cutting all the flowers off the plants. So again, if you're trying to catch birds who are attracted to flowers because of the nectar, and they're cutting all the flowers off the plant because they wanted to make more juice, you're in big trouble. And so we lost both of our Guanacaste sites. Not only the one that got plowed under, but this one where they're cutting the flowers off. Well, so much for Guanacaste, because we now had nowhere else to go there. So 8 years are done. The hummingbirds are gone because the aloe was gone. But we had a total of 798 RubyThroats banded, and we had 9 returns in the later year that came back later. Okay, and we had that one foreign encounter that showed up in Baxley, Georgia. So that's pretty good, but you know, I always want more, so we got to have more. So I was not going to be deterred by the loss of aloe vera, because we still had an ace up our sleeve in Costa Rica, and that ace again was Ernesto Carmen. And Ernesto had figured out, not far from his house, over on the eastern part of Costa Rica, at Ujaras, there was a Chayote Farm. And then, this is a Chayote Farm. This looks like grassland, but what it is it's 6-foot-high arbors with this squash that grows up into the arbor, and the squash hangs down. And it's called Chayote. And we had actually worked a little bit at Ujaras, which is over here east of San Jose, in previous years. But this is what Chayote looks like. And if you go to Walmart, you can find Chayote that's pale green. It looks just like that. It looks like a pear that's malformed. And it's a very popular plant in the Neotropics. It's also called chocho or mirliton. Some of you may have cooked with it. But it's got prolific flowers. And if you've got prolific flowers, you may guess you might have hummingbirds. Okay, and in fact we do. And so we set up in this very difficult working condition an arbor of chayote, 3-legged stool underneath, and you put up nets in the background and you wait for hummingbirds to fly in. And I'll be darned, it works. Okay, and so this group right here, the Ujarascals, which is my favorite name of all the groups, and the Uja Paz, named for our guide, Paz Arola. And then the most recent group which I called the 30th Faithful, went in November 2018, and they were called that because all of them had been on at least one other trip with me before. And in fact, 2 of them had been on 6 previous trips. Real junkies, real groupies, okay? And I was very proud of that group, and that's actually the last trip we've taken to Costa Rica. But altogether, from 2012 through 2018, in the Chayote, we banded another 531 RubyThroats. Okay, not quite as productive as the aloe vera, but we didn't take as many trips there either. So, but they're not supposed to be there. We thought the southernmost location was over there in Guanacaste for big numbers. It turns out they're much further south and east in Costa Rica, over there in Chayote. So we thought they weren't supposed to be there, but they knew they were. So we banded them. So amazingly, in the Chayote, we have actually netted 16 species of hummingbirds. I can only band RubyThroats, but we had 16 different species caught in the nets. But we saw birds like this, the black-crested coquette. What a hummingbird. 30 different hummingbird species observed in the Chayote. There are only 51 species in Costa Rica. That's amazing. So you think that Chayote might be a hummingbird magnet? Plant some in your yard and see what happens. Okay, it'll grow here. All right, so I'm going to quickly go through part 2 here with the other neotropical expeditions we've taken. In March 2010, we went to Crooked Tree in Belize. And chronologically, we're backtracking here. And why do we go to Belize, Dr. Hilton? And the answer to that question is because you can see things like jabiru storks. Okay, and that's a pretty big, that's not a ruby-throated hummingbird. Okay. With a long bill, that's a jabiru stork. All right, how big is a jabiru stork? Well, they're really big.
Oh my goodness.
White ibis on the right, little blue heron on the left. That's not some Halloween scarecrow, that's really a stork. So. But we didn't want to catch one of those in our nets. So we went to Belize because of this tree. And it happens to be a cashew tree, which is not native to Belize. They came from Brazil. But they flower in February and March, spring migration. The birds are coming back through Belize on the eastern side of the Yucatan Peninsula. And I went down on my own a couple days ahead of time, and here was this little 1/4-inch flower on the cashew, and what did I see? Well, I saw adult female ruby-throated hummingbird feeding. So I said, okay, we got it made. Bring the team in. The Belizeoneers came in, and here they are giving you the secret sign of Operation RubyThroat right there. So, all right, and we, in that very first time in Belize, we set out mist nets in the mist and put up the Dawkins Traps at the lodge, and we caught 54 ruby-throated hummingbirds, okay, including the adult males, which were in pristine plumage. You know, they're getting ready to come back. They want to look good. They got this big red throat there, yes, and they're strutting around on it. And here they come, ready to woo the females with their color. So we went back to Crooked Tree over a 5-year span, and took 7 groups altogether, including 3 groups from Keystone College up in Pennsylvania. It was nice to have college kids involved, and altogether we banded 149 ruby-throats, had 1 later year return. So that wasn't all that productive, but it was okay. I went to Salvador on my own and banded the only 2 ruby-throats ever banded there on a 1-day trip. And when I went to Guatemala, and I found a place where a woman had hummingbird feeders up, and we banded 58 hummingbirds, ruby-throats, at an elevation of 6,000 feet on the shores of Lake Atitlan. And they're not supposed to go to 6,000 feet. But again, they don't know that, so they're there. So 3 years later, I took a group back to Guatemala, and we went to the other side of Atitlan volcano, and we banded, well, a grand total of the nearest 4 hummingbirds. It wasn't very productive either. And so then we tried Nicaragua, trying to hit all the countries, and we went to Montebello, which is very much like Guanacaste. Not aloe vera, but dry rainforest or dry tropical forest. And the Nicaragua down there, well, we caught 15 ruby-throated hummingbirds. no adult males at all there. And then we went back again to Nicaragua the next year. I hear music. And we banded a grand total of 3 new hummingbirds, so we're not going to Nicaragua anymore either. It just doesn't seem productive to go there, or Guatemala, or Belize. So to close up now, we've completed 30 Operation RubyThroats through Holbrook. I took this year off because of prostate cancer surgery and kidney stone. Passed it last week, by the way. So we have 12 trips to Guanacaste and 8 to Ujaras. I took 1 on my own to Ujaras. We have 7 trips to Belize. We have 1 to Guatemala with a group and 1 by myself. 2 to Nicaragua, 1 by myself to El Salvador, and then 1 to Honduras by myself. That's a grand total of 30 trips. So I have about 250 alumni, and I mentioned some of those have been repeaters along the way. So it's nice to have all those people interested in hummingbirds. But the number of trips isn't as important as the number of birds. 798 in the aloe vera, 531 in the chayote, 62 in Guatemala, 149 in Belize, in the cashews, 18 in Nicaragua, 2 in El Salvador, grand total 1540. And you might remember when I got started in 2004, the number was 46. Okay, so we now have a sizable number of birds banded, and we know a whole lot about everything except migration. But that's what the work's been about anyway. What have our results been? Well, we learned about site fidelity. We know the birds come back to the same location. And why is that important? Well, it's important because if we know hummingbirds that we band here are going back to exactly the same spot down there, say in Costa Rica, we can now go to Costa Rican landowners and Costa Rican politicians and Costa Rican conservation and say, look, they're not your hummingbirds. They're not our hummingbirds. They're everybody's hummingbirds. So this is not just fun and games I'm doing. We can actually get a conservation message out of this that gives us a reason to protect habitat on both ends and along the way, for that matter. Okay? That's pretty important stuff. So that's been true in 2 countries, 3 different sites. We know about this wing molt thing, which is kind of fun. We know about non-breeding territorial. We've seen these males defending down there. We know 1 data point for northbound migration. And we've learned that hummingbirds are opportunistic, RubyThroats are opportunistic. They don't feed on just one thing. Aloe vera, a non-native plant. Chayote, which is a native plant, but which is grown in these vast commercial plantations. Cashew trees in Belize. You know, so hummingbirds are opportunistic. RubyThroats are survivors. People worry about RubyThroats. My trend lines are all going up. They like the edge. They're not birds of the deep woods or the open prairie. Every suburban backyard has 4 edges, and people plant for them and hang feeders for them. RubyThroats are going to be fine. Well, unless something really bad happens, and it could. And we learned about native plant foraging, which is a whole nother talk, because they're feeding on different stuff down there than they're feeding on up here. Mostly, except for lantana and blue vervain, which grows wild down there and people plant up here as an ornamental. None of the success that I've had would have been true or would have happened without citizen scientists. 250 of them have gone with me. But more importantly, or just as importantly, not more importantly, but without Ernesto Carmen, it just wouldn't have worked. I mean, he discovered these plantations where they were. His wife Ella, who passed away a few years ago, was a part of the team. And then I had a bunch of ticos that helped me also, including Juan Diego Vargas and my newest helper, Paz Irola. Those people are just wonderful. They love their natural resources just like we love our natural resources. And again, these hummingbirds don't know geographical boundaries. You know, they don't know politics. They're not our hummingbirds. They're everybody's hummingbirds. So to these folks I say, whenever I can, I say, gracias amigos, and to you I say,
Adios.
thank you, friends. Okay, that's it. So I went a little bit long, but I had a lot to say, so I appreciate your patience, and if you have to leave, it's okay. I'm not mad. So I open up for a few questions, and I see a hand up over here. Yes, sir.
What do you recommend to improve the habitat for RubyThroat?
Plant. Plant whatever you can. If you look at the Operation RubyThroat site, on it I have the top 10 native plants and the top 10 non-native plants. And in the spring, for example, columbine is an early spring wildflower. Red buckeye is a great shrub to plant. In the summer, you've got a lot of summer blooming plants. The best one is Trumpet Creeper. I think Trumpet Creeper is the quintessential hummingbird plant. It grows everywhere in the eastern United States where hummingbirds breed. 4-inch long orange flower. It flowers the whole time they're here, when they're from breeding time up to departure time. Now, some people think it's like kudzu, but you can always whack it back with nuclear devices, I guess. But I think Trumpet Creeper is the single most important thing you can plant. Plant it on a trellis, plant it on a big tree, and you'll have hummingbirds. I've got some that are blooming 60 feet up in an oak tree. They're not coming to my feeders, they're way up there, but I know they're there because I can see them. So I'd start with that. Look at my website, okay? But put in plants. And if you're a native plant freak, plant native plants. But remember, every plant is native to some place. Okay? Lantana grows down there wild. It's great hummingbird food in the wintertime, great hummingbird food here in the summertime. Another question. Yes, sir.
Are there any other people studying the ruby-throated hummingbird besides yourself from the base in South Carolina, like from Canada or from?
There are no other hummingbird banders in South Carolina right now. There are a couple in North Carolina, and they're scattered around. Nobody else is studying them in the tropics.